In 1969, the United Kingdom made a monumental discovery, just 200 meters off its coast, the massive Ekefisk oil field. At the time, it was one of the largest in the world, with the potential to transform the nation's fortunes. Meanwhile, the UK squandered its windfall. Rather than investing strategically, it used the revenues to fund tax cuts for the wealthy, missing out on the chance to build a fund worth over $1 trillion. These contrasting choices shaped the two nations profoundly. Norway is now one of the world's richest countries, with its sovereign wealth fund amounting to over $280,000 per citizen, funding exceptional living standards. The country was desperate for a quick fix, and when oil revenues started pouring in, they were rapidly spent. By the decade's end, the UK had extracted roughly 600 million barrels of oil, worth an estimated $19 billion, which funded a range of services from the NHS and housing projects to pensions and welfare. Despite internal warnings that selling Brent oil would result in massive long-term losses, shares were sold off starting in 1982. At the time, economic crisis loomed large. Inflation was soaring, unemployment rising, and strikes were paralyzing industries. But rather than reinvesting in infrastructure or future-proofing the economy, most of the money funded tax cuts that did little to boost long-term growth. Studies suggest the UK missed out on at least $400 billion in potential revenue by failing to follow Norway's model. Experts estimate a sovereign wealth fund similar to Norway's could have grown to £850 billion, providing an economic cushion that would be invaluable today. Although the UK has made strides in offshore wind, decades of missed opportunities have left it lagging in renewables and with an outdated power grid. Thatcher's government embraced free market economics, arguing that privatization would boost efficiency, reduce government debt, and reinvigorate the economy. The UK's failure to do the same stands as a stark reminder of how short-sighted decisions can shape a nation's fate for generations. If the UK had charted a different course, it could now face the future with confidence instead of grappling with economic crises. It used oil wealth to establish the government pension fund Global, channeling revenues into global investments, including stakes in major foreign companies and properties like London's Regent Street. This strategy secured financial returns and granted Norway international economic influence far beyond its size. While some privatizations, like BT, brought real benefits, the proceeds were largely funneled into tax cuts, particularly for high earners under the theory of trickle-down economics. By insulating its fund from political cycles, Norway ensured oil wealth could only be used for long-term national interests, not short-term political needs. This prudent management allowed Norway to avoid pitfalls like Dutch disease, which weakens other industries as a country's currency strengthens from resource exports. As government debt surpasses £2 trillion, public services like the NHS and schools suffer from chronic underfunding, and infrastructure continues to deteriorate. Meanwhile, wages stagnate, inequality deepens, and the government must choose between cutting essential programs, raising taxes, or borrowing more, choices that only add strain to the economy. The UK, by contrast, saw its manufacturing decline in the 1980s as North Sea oil profits strengthened the pound, pricing British exports out of global markets. But in practice, wealth concentrated at the top, inequality widened, and private sector investment steadily declined. By 1985, government ownership had dropped below 50%, relinquishing control over one of the UK's most valuable assets. Brent oil was later absorbed by BP, and the UK lost its direct claim on future oil profits. But a significant portion was also used to plug budget deficits rather than being invested for the long term. Meanwhile, the UK has experienced steady decline, now burdened with over $2 trillion in government debt, and facing crises in healthcare, infrastructure, and education. From the outset, the Norwegian government placed the oil industry under democratic control, maintaining 70% ownership of oil fields and imposing taxes of up to 78% on oil company profits. This approach ensured most oil wealth stayed in Norway to benefit its citizens, laying the groundwork for the government pension fund, Global Sovereign Wealth Fund, designed to grow over time and secure future prosperity. But the UK wasn't alone. Norway also discovered the field. and both countries began drilling simultaneously, extracting roughly equal amounts of oil. But it didn't have to be this way. At a critical moment, the UK made decisions that undermined its long-term stability. Instead, real wages have stagnated since 2008, and many Britons have grown disillusioned with the country's economic trajectory. This rush to privatize reflected a broader pattern of governance, prioritizing immediate political victories over the nation's future well-being. While Norway kept oil assets under state control, the UK quickly sold them off, chasing short-term political gains. This raised over $1 billion in the early 1980s, but at the cost of forfeiting future revenues that could have ensured financial security for generations. Yet their stories diverged dramatically. Norway transformed its oil wealth into a $1.5 trillion sovereign wealth fund, securing the nation's long-term prosperity. To bridge ever-growing financial gaps, the UK government has resorted to desperate measures, from cutting subsidies for pensioners to considering historically high tax rates. The UK retained ownership of its oil resources, could have reinvested profits in national infrastructure, public services, and education, lifting everyone's standard of living. During the 1970s, the UK faced rampant inflation, industrial unrest, and economic stagnation, culminating in a humiliating bailout from the IMF. Norway, by contrast, had a clear and far-sighted vision. Things took a dramatic turn in the UK in the 1980s, when Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's government prioritized privatization. Why did the UK make such a short-sighted move? Between the 1980s and 1990s, privatization raised around £67 billion. Norway's approach was not just fortunate, it was strategic. What set Norway apart was its patience and institution building. Norway also invested heavily in transitioning beyond oil, becoming a leader in renewable energy, electric vehicles, and sustainable technologies. Today, the UK's lack of a sovereign wealth fund has become painfully clear. Norway's experience proves that thoughtful, long-term planning can transform natural resource wealth into lasting prosperity.